Welcome to the Summer of Superman. Get ready for an electrifying journey through the iconic tale that shook the world of superheroes 3 decades ago. Moving Panels presents a special series dedicated to the monumental event that changed the course of comic book history, the death and return of Superman. Join us as we dive deep into the pages of one of the most impactful stories ever told, exploring the Man of Steel's ultimate sacrifice and his triumphant resurrection. But that's just the beginning. Experience the thrilling animated movies, The Death of Superman and Reign of the Supermen, that brought this epic story to life on the screen. In each episode, we will dissect every chapter, dissecting the emotions and going behind the scenes of this unforgettable saga and its animated counterparts. From the impact on Superman's friends and allies to the worldwide mourning that ensued, Moving Panels will leave no stone unturned, delivering a comprehensive exploration of this milestone in comic book history. So grab your cape and join us this summer for the Summer of Superman on Moving Panels, where we honor the 30th anniversary of the death and return of Superman, episode by episode, reliving the awe, the heartache, and the undying legacy of the man who inspired millions. Don't miss a single installment of this thrilling podcast event. Subscribe now to Moving Panels on your favorite podcast platform and be a part of the Summer of Superman. Welcome to this Moving Panels One Shot. Let's have a nerdy little conversation as we continue our Summer of Superman. As Chad Smith joins me again as we continue our conversation. We are now following the events of Death of Superman. We are going to talk today about the Funeral for a Friend issues, which led into kind of a world without Superman. And we're even going to get into Reign of Superman, which will lead us into the movie review that I will be doing next week with Nicholas Pepin. So please welcome once again, Chad Smith. How are you, Chad?
I'm doing great, man. How about you guys?
Good. This is honestly where I think there's more to the Death of Superman than just the Death of Superman run. I think that a lot of people remember the death. They remember the fight. They remember those 4 issues. They may not even remember the issues that led into it. You got those 4 issues, mainly Superman 75. But for me, it's not just that. It's also what followed, where you had the moments with the Kents, the moments with Lois, but also even Batman and what was happening with Blue Beetle, Booster Gold, Guy Gardner, even Lex Luthor, Supergirl. Mm-hmm. It's all of that. Bibbo. Definitely going to talk about Bibbo. It's all of that where it's the way they react, it's the way they respond. Yeah. That really, to me, solidifies how important the storyline is and really pulls in more of the drama and the tragedy of this event.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with that. I think it's, we kind of conflate some of it. Like you think about the Kents, because there's the scene in the Death of Superman run where you get to see them reacting to what they're seeing on TV. And I think that leads really well into what you get with the Kents, the whole heart attack and, everything else that happens later. And so it's kind of easy, especially decades later, to blur the lines. And I actually reread this or skimmed it at the very least, to do this one shot, and I had forgotten so much of it. They do such a great job of setting up, what we didn't see coming at all at that time, and then the Reign of Superman and all that. But Funeral for a Friend is really interesting. I think it's a kind of a singular event in comic book history. There's always, you kill characters so that there is fallout like that. So that's a fair thing. But usually we just get kind of the story, just what that led to next sort of thing. Whereas this was unique in that it stopped everything for a second. There were other books that get drawn into this that the Guardian, there's several other ones where their next several issues are are just dealing with the ramifications of the death of Superman.
Yeah.
And so it just, I don't know, you don't see anything else like it in the comic world, not quite like it anyways.
Yeah, no, I totally, I mean, probably the closest thing Marvel's ever done to have this big of a connection is Civil War.
Yeah, for sure.
Where you just saw that, just the ripples of it going throughout the entire Marvel comics, even the smaller ones. You know, Howard the Duck even had issues dealing with Civil War.
Yeah,
but the funeral for a friend run, whatever you want to call it, was just a continuation of the 4 Superman titles, with the exception of the first one. The first one's a Justice League issue, and this is where they number it. Excuse me. This is where they number it really weird, because that issue has each one of these issues has the black border around it and has Funeral for a Friend at the top. Mm-hmm. So the Justice League issue, which is Justice League of America number 70, it just says Funeral for a Friend. Then the second one, which is Adventures of Superman 498, says Funeral for a Friend /1, which makes the numbering so confusing because it's the second issue of the storyline, but they put a 1 at the top of it.
Yeah.
So it only goes to 8, but it's technically 9 issues. But I like the Justice League of America issue to kick things off, because it is the entire story of that comic is just the Justice League all getting together.
Right. Like regathering.
To figure out. Yeah. It's to figure out what happened and what do we do next.
Yeah.
It's all the different ways they're dealing with it too.
And man, I cannot remember that character's name. Like the little guy who is, for lack of a better analogy, the Justice League's Jarvis, but he's an actual person. Yeah. He decides to hand out. I can't think of his name. He hands out the black armbands. You get that scene. Yeah. You get oh my gosh, I'm doing terrible with character names, but the 2 characters that were actually at the battle,
Bloodwind and Ice.
Bloodwind and Ice, and Bloodwind decides that Ice is too wounded and that they're not going to be any help trying to revive Superman, that it's hopeless. So you get them like leaving the scene, even that whole thing was kind of fascinating in hindsight. They did a good job of kind of setting up some story with the little details of how Superman is invulnerable even in death, and it's kind of just an interesting little side note that his invulnerability is somehow a vulnerability, because human tools can't work on him to help him get better if he is injured, that sort of thing. So it's definitely some interesting stuff as everybody gathers some characters you kind of forgot about that weren't necessarily attached to the Justice League anymore, all just felt the need to come to the Justice League to, commemorate Superman like this. And so it's just really an interesting run altogether.
Yeah, and we'll get into more of what you're talking about with the tools, because that comes later with Bibbo. But I mean, when the Flash is coming to this meeting and he runs by the United Nations and he makes the comment of all the flags being at half mast, and he's talking about this must be the way it is all across the world, because that's what Superman meant to everybody. But I even like Booster Gold, who's usually always portrayed as a very arrogant, character.
Yeah.
The fact that he talks about that due to his battle with Doomsday, he exhausted all of his power from the suit, and the suit was destroyed. Yeah,
the Future Man suit's in ruins. Yeah.
But yet he still acts as a hero, because I think they're in the hospital because of Blue Beetle. Right. They're in the hospital, and Maxima and Guy Gardner actually get into like a fight. Because again, that's their personalities. That's how they're reacting. And it's Booster Gold that becomes the voice of reason between the two of them, which again just shows how much this moment was. Yeah, but you got all of them arriving.
So
You got
weird.
Go ahead.
Weird side note. So they hand out the armbands, which is supposed to be a nod to the fact that they gave you as the customer and reader an armband with the death of Superman, which we talked about last time. Am I the only one that was like a little bit irked that it's not the same band though? Like so it makes me wonder.
It didn't have.
It makes
the color.
me wonder. Did they? Yeah, it's not the bleeding S. Which you would understand that Superman's friends would not want to wear a bleeding S. But it makes me, cynically or not, I don't know, wonder, did they do the bands and then the writers decided this would be kind of cool to write into, the Justice League, and then kind of realize like, yeah, but we can't use quite the same band. This doesn't work.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just kind of wondered about that whole scenario. It was sort of interesting to me. And then you talking about your buddy Bibbo, the whole little weird scene, and I know this is in a different issue, but the whole little weird scene where he deals with the guy who is selling the Daily
Superman,
Planet.
Yeah.
Along with the Justice League armband and a T-shirt, and that whole weird little, I don't know. I think there was some meta stuff going on there, but it's very bizarre episode where Bibbo's about to beat this dude up and then decides to let him go and even give him a job, But anyways.
Yeah, you look, you understand, you need money. Come down and work in my restaurant. But then Bibbo decides to just put on the T-shirt and that he is going to live his life as Superman would.
Yeah, it's so weird though.
This is, for me, like I think Bibbo is almost a forgotten character.
Oh, 100%,
but he is so important to a lot of, this Superman, mythology, and he, as Bethany has stated, he represents the everyman.
Yeah.
He's pretty much the voice of the people in these issues. He might be a super fan, but for the most part, he's the one that's explaining to everybody what's going on.
Yeah, and I think that is. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if he's the everyman way in that. I kind of feel like Bibbo was almost like. I feel like Bibbo was the guys who had been reading these before Death of Superman. It was almost like it was giving kind of almost two looks into the world. The casual, like, oh man, this is a big deal, I should read these. And then there's Bibbo, who's the kind of the voice of the guy that has always been a Superman fan and always kept up with all these issues and everything. So it is kind of fascinating though.
Yeah, well, and then we're jumping into it. The next issue in Adventures of Superman 498, we then get to see we're back at the site of the death, and we're dealing with Turpin and Sawyer having to fight off Cadmus, who's trying to take the body. Then we got Guardian, who turns on
Cadmus.
I forgot the guy's name, but the guy from Cadmus that's trying to steal Superman's body. And then you got Bibbo and Dr. Hamilton that step up and go, yeah, we're gonna try to revive Superman.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Team Luthor Sentinel with the flying suit that they're like, okay, you're going to shoot your blast into this machine, which is then going to be attached to the defibrillators. And then Bibbo puts on a belt that is supposed to shield him. And they just give this huge jolt of electricity to Superman that just launches Bilbo several feet backwards.
Yeah.
But again, that just shows how much, again, you got, like you're saying, Bibbo, who is, no, this we don't just give up. This man's done so much for us that we have to do anything and everything we can. And like he does at the end of the Death of Superman movie, where he prays and says, why did it have to be him? Why couldn't it be me? I mean, here you got an example of that in the comic of Bibbo stepping forward and said, hey, look, I'll risk my life if it means bringing Superman back.
Right. Yeah, and again, I kind of think that's that fan's entry to it, because there was still some disbelief. Like, no, they're not really going to kill Superman off. They'll figure something out and bring him back somehow. Which, spoilers, they do bring him back. But
What?
So what? But it is super fascinating. The whole thing with Cadmus is very interesting. I want to say the guy's his name's Wright, like with a Wright. But I don't know. It doesn't. I'm having trouble. Cadmus? Yeah, the Cadmus director. And I like how one line stood out to me as somebody's like, "Are you from the CIA?" And he's like, "No, not really." And it just kind of struck me as very 90s that like the worst thing you could be was like a Black Ops guy from the CIA, and so to be worse than that was to be to be the guy that even looks down on the CIA guy. It was kind of interesting, but
it was Westfield. I just looked
Westfield. Holy cow!
Yeah.
Well, I had the W right, I guess.
You had the W, so yeah. But congratulations, you had the W.
Westfield. Yeah, that character though, not a great character.
No.
Pretty.
But I mean, you still kind of have to have your villain without it being a villain you have to have a superhero to fight. So
sure.
Having a quote unquote political
behind the scene
villain, the guy who's trying to take advantage of Superman, the death of Superman, so that Cadmus and the government can study his body as well as Doomsday, because they also claim Doomsday's body.
I do like the conflict you get with Guardian, though, who is, supposedly, given his powers and everything by Cadmus, supposed to be working for Cadmus, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And he has to wrestle with this. And you see it over the course of several issues that he doesn't quit Cadmus, but he stands against Westfield at the initial trying to take Superman's body. And then, fast forward a couple issues later, you have the lead up to one of the Reign of Supermen, when you get the first sightings issues. There's the whole thing where he confronts Westfield because there's a piece of what we find later to be Superboy's garment, which just happened to be a piece that had the Kryptonian S shield on it. I thought that was pretty remarkable, the odds that one piece got ripped off his suit, but comics, whatever. But yeah, Guardian has to wrestle with that, and he's having that whole conversation with Westfield, and and winds up like realizing that these aren't the people that he wants to work for. It's some pretty good stuff. You just see everybody wrestle with their world through this marker of who Superman is. They all have to decide, do they want to live up to Superman's legacy? And it's kind of interesting. You don't see, we see a lot of resets in comics. Rarely are they moral and ethical resets. It's more often than not, it's a timeline gone wrong reset. So it's just kind of an interesting, situation altogether when you see all of these guys wrestling with who they are in relation to Superman and the ideal that he brought. You see this with Batman several times. They kind of explore this same line, but for it to be universe wide, it was pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Again, I've got to try to figure out how we need to keep moving, because
chronologically through this, it's no kidding.
Yeah. Because I know I want to talk about the Kents and Lois. Because you've got at the end of this issue where Jimmy and Perry are talking about the death.
Mm-hmm.
And Perry alludes to the picture that Jimmy has, that it's, probably going to be the greatest picture he's ever taken. And
right.
And then they start talking about, well, you also have to think about how this is affecting Lois, because not only did Superman mean so much to her, this is the first time we go, hey, remember there's Clark Kent too.
Right.
And Perry says, Clark is one of the hundreds, or if not thousands, I forgot what he says, of people who are still missing.
Right.
After
they haven't recovered battle from the rubble kind of thing. Yeah.
So this, and then I think at the end of this issue, Lois is either given or she just walks into the Daily Planet and she's holding the cape.
Mm-hmm.
The famous cape blowing on the post. And I think that's honestly what it just ends with. Or I don't even know if she says anything, but then that starts the whole story that she's developing, where she's trying to come to terms with it all and doesn't really know what to do. And she's constantly questioning, should she reach out to the Kents? Which, ultimately leads to, I think the Kents just show up at her door.
Mm-hmm.
And she apologizes to them. And no, I do think she calls them, now that I'm thinking about it. I think Lois finally reaches out to call them.
Yeah. And
then they come. That's what I think it is.
Yep.
Yeah. She calls, which it makes it her speaking to Jonathan and Martha. I think it finally sets in for her how real the moment is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such an emotional thing going between them. And then the fact that Martha and Jonathan, even though we've gone through what they experienced watching the fight on television, the fact that they couldn't be there, them having their own little funeral out in the field with
when
Clark's
they just gather some of his stuff. Yeah, that was pretty interesting.
Extremely emotional moment. But then when Lois calls, they are the loving and caring parents again.
Right.
Like they are there for Lois. Because, Lois was essentially their daughter-in-law. The wedding hadn't happened yet, but
But I also just think that that's reiterating some of what we talked about before. Why I didn't like the Doomsday movie. You're again finding out that this is who the Kents are. They put other people before themselves, and they transferred that into Kal-El when they raised him as Clark Kent. Yeah. And so it's just another reinforcing the idea that their morality means something and affected Superman, which then has, as we were just talking about, affected all of these other heroes and humanity in a broader sense is kind of brought into these episodes as well. You get these kind of weird snippets of interviews with kind of everyday citizens and stuff, and Bibbo and just all these people that have to decide how they're going to live like Superman, who decided to live like the Kents. And so, of course, the Kents put aside their own grieving to be there for Lois in that moment. So to me, it's just a natural reiteration of that compassion that they gave Clark from the beginning.
Yeah, I even, you talked about the little interviews. I even like the moment where they show some of the villains locked up, and how Dollman or Toyman, excuse me, Toyman actually kind of has a little bit of sympathy. Yeah, talking about, yes, he truly always did care for the children, but then you've got Parasite, who it's oh, I'll never get to leech off that power again. That's the true tragedy, and then you get all the other, I think just random voices. I think you just see the outside of the prison, and Superman bought the farm, and Superman's dead, and so I like that contrast that they have. And then you've even got Lex, who, when they bring in Doomsday's body, he's kind of got that teeter-totter of the way he feels, and I think he takes like a chair and he just smashes it across Doomsday because of his frustration.
Yeah.
Because Doomsday took away the one thing he always wanted to accomplish, and took away the one person. Because again, I do think it's a mixed feeling for Lex. Not only is it that Lex is the villain, and Lex always wanted to be the one to take down Superman, but at the same time, Superman was the only person that Lex truly felt was I guess I would say equal.
Yeah.
You know, that he was the one that always could best him. And the only one that Lex felt was worthy of
that's what I was
his intelligence. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just having those moments as well throughout this run. And then of course you've got, Supergirl stepping in. They even do the moments where you almost think for a second it's Superman, or the villains think it's Superman.
Well, you do get that, and I guess we're kind of getting into a world without Superman, but they start kind of pitching who's going to take his place. And of course Lex is pitching that it should be Supergirl. And so you'll have to fill me in on this. I actually don't know the history
control
here. Right.
He has control.
Is that actual Supergirl though? Because I do not know the Supergirl history. And the what's the creature's name? He finds her in the aftermath of the battle, and she's lost the ability to shapeshift, and he has to take her back. I had forgotten all about all this entire run before rereading some of this, and I was like, I don't know Supergirl history great, but I don't think that's the real Supergirl. But
no, so the, I guess you would say, the quote unquote real Supergirl had actually perished in Crisis.
Oh, okay.
And
I almost have said that this one was an alien, but that would also be true of the real Supergirl. So.
Yeah. Well, no, but I get what you're saying, and it kind of is. So post Crisis, so this was probably still end of the 80s. Supergirl, quote unquote, Supergirl returns, but she's a creature, a being known as Matrix.
Matrix, that was the name I was trying to.
Yeah, and she gets, I think it's Lex gives her, or Matrix, Lana Lang's memories, which originally has Matrix shapeshift into Lana. Mm-hmm. But then she becomes the Supergirl that a lot of people think of, the Supergirl with the skirt, and just looks like Superman in the torso. No really difference there with the cape, but she's got the skirt on. But Matrix has the ability to fly, has the super strength, but also is like psychokinetic, can turn invisible, which is something that comes into play in some of the Reign of Superman storylines. But like I said, that's this version of Supergirl. It's a being.
I didn't know the history there. I just was like, I don't think this is real Supergirl.
No. Yeah, and actually Matrix is not an alien. It's creation.
Okay.
It's man-made synthetic life form. But yeah, because I think it's Turpin that actually finds her after the battle in the rubble, and he has no idea because it's just the
kind of a blob,
raisin-looking dude that Supergirl turns into. But yeah, she's just very weak. And of course, shape-shifting also is very painful for her, which they always talk about, because even when Lex gets her back and she is able to turn back into the Supergirl form, she talks about how much it hurt. So that's that Supergirl.
Speaking of Lex, I did like that. I know we're rabbit trailing hard, but I liked that the writers realized they needed to explain the current iteration of Lex, because the casual reader is used to, cue ball bald Lex. Yeah. And they had been running this other story where it's the clone body with Lex Luthor's, brain and spinal column in it. And that was a creepy few episodes. But where you have Lex give this. The writers realized they needed to explain this a little bit.
Yeah, because they've got all these new they've got all these new readers, and one of the biggest things is
Wolfman Lex. Yeah, it's like
yeah.
So he has to explain that he's a clone. And I was like, that's kind of interesting.
Again, I know you're talking about the rabbit trail. I mean, my brain is just going through all the different
so much stuff.
Yeah, and I can't remember which issue's which, but I know that there's one point you see Lois again contemplating should she call the Kents. You're at the Kents farmhouse. The phone rings. For a second, you're thinking, okay, Lois finally decided to call, and then it ends up being Lana.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got Lana Lang talking to them, which... Lana hadn't been involved in this story, and so it's again pulling out the here's
how big a deal
one of Clark's best friends growing up, who knows his secret.
Yeah,
and in the middle of this, we get the funeral. There's that great layout of the horse-drawn carriage with Superman's casket, American flag, and then you've got all the superheroes trailing in behind. Which I will point out a little trivia: all of the creative team, so Jurgens and Ordway, they're in the crowd
with
in that shot
with that episode. Or I keep saying episode with that issue's main writer is almost front and center, along with her husband.
Yeah, Louise Simpson or Simonson. Yeah, you got her and all of them. But I love that it's they kind of, even though you have to know who they are to be able to point them out.
Right.
It's the page that has the little box that says, like Louise Simonson's story.
Right.
Mike Carlin, editor. Like, hey, just let you know, we're all in here.
That's cool though.
So yeah,
it's a man. What an issue to be the penciler on. There were so many properties that get drawn into this.
Yeah, all those characters,
and that had to take some time to do this issue. But
yeah, you kind of hope that Dennis Jangs and I forgot who the penciler was. But you kind of hope that they have tackled all of these characters at some point, since they had to draw them all. Because they even have, there's even a quick moment with Lobo.
Yeah.
And Lobo, even though he's on some distant planet or whatnot, he finds out.
Yep.
And he's just, it's like, say it ain't so. Say it, just beating up a bunch of guys. But... and then again, you have those moments of people wanting to be Superman. There's a little kid whose cat, I think, is stuck in a tree.
Yeah.
And he's crying out. And this other kind of older, I think it's an older boy or something. Or no. It's not a cat stuck in a tree. One boy has a cat. Then another kid is crying and he walks over and hands the cat to the kid saying that the cat will make him feel better. That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, it's all this great, then I think there's a guy like protesting inside of the funeral and Batman like confronts him and he was like, he goes, Metropolis may not be my town, but today it is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's just, you even get the underworlders who you see them looking up, watching it go over the grates,
Yeah.
It's such the actual funeral itself is such a great moment. And we get the moment that you and I talked about in Superman Doomsday, where the guy confronts Jimmy Olsen about, but then this in the actual comic, Jimmy just punches him.
Right.
And then I think Robin steps in. Yeah. I think Robin and Wonder Woman, even all the Green Lantern, all step in because it starts a little riot. But yeah, it's such this is such a good story.
Yeah.
But now Bethany and I talked about this in the Death of Superman episode last week. But I want to ask your opinion. What were your thoughts on Bill and Hillary Clinton being part of it?
Very confusing. 100% honesty. When you do the math, he had to have literally just
been
been
elected.
elected.
Yeah.
So he's not actually president yet. He's not been
No.
inaugurated. He would be in January, and
which was the cover date of the comic.
But they're referencing Christmas. So it just doesn't quite work, and it's just strange to me. I don't know why. Like, it is what it is. But when you're bringing a real world president and his wife into a fictional story that even has made up American cities, it's a little bizarre. But it comes back again. We see Cyborg Superman, the whole saving the White House thing, and then Bill Clinton apparently is not great at. He just immediately trusts this guy and takes
but it's kind of
his
funny
cyborg technology from him.
Yeah,
But
it's kind of funny when you get to that story, though. They never show the president, and they never actually mention. They do.
Yeah.
I don't remember them showing
Superman
them.
hands Bill Clinton the little communication device.
The little device. I remember that. For some reason, I thought he handed it to the...
I mean, maybe he didn't like, hey, Bill Clinton, here's this, but like, it's clearly Bill Clinton. Like,
okay.
But anyways.
I believe you. I mean, again, with preparation for this, I've read through
so many
of the
issues,
comics.
Yeah.
You talked about skimming them. I read all of them, all the way through I even read and we'll get into this in a minute with the Rain stuff. I even went back and read the issues where Hank Henshaw is originally introduced and where the Eradicator is originally introduced. So yeah, it's hard to hold on to some little details.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a lot.
But
even for comic books, it's a lot.
Yeah. So when you get to the end of Funeral for a Friend, that's when they have the Jonathan heart attack. Jonathan Kent's heart attack. And they do it very similar to the way most people are used to, where he collapses in the field. I mean, that's even the cover. It's just him laying face down in the field. And
I'm not
Martha
laughing
running.
at Jonathan Kent dying. I'm laughing that it's what most people think happened well before this.
Yeah, because most people don't realize that people are so used to the movies.
Uncle Ben. Yeah.
Yeah.
They think that it was like the creation process of Superman, but it's not. But yeah.
No. Which I like that in Clark and Lois, or Lois and Clark in the television show, they had Jonathan Kent. Like, hey, look, he's alive.
He's supposed to be alive. Yeah.
He's supposed to be alive. He's alive in the comics. Just because they decided to have him had a heart attack in 78, and then I know this was before it, but even and just because they decided that Superman wasn't fast enough to grab his dad from a tornado in Man of Steel,
without being seen, apparently, that was
which but that's another episode.
Yeah,
but we do have the moment now. All we get in the Funeral for a Friend is Jonathan having the heart attack.
Right.
And we don't know. We're kind of left hanging on that moment. It's not until months later.
Yep.
Because really it's the continuation of that story that starts off the reign of Superman.
So on that note, 100% honesty, I had forgotten that was really the thing that kicked off the entire reign of Superman. The idea that Jonathan Kent saw or somehow participated in the retrieval of Clark Kent's soul. Yeah. And that his soul, who did his soul inhabit? Which of these 4 Supermen?
Yeah.
That was really interesting. That's pretty like cutting edge comic book stuff for that time in particular. Like I'd forgotten that particular note of this story, and it's really cool.
Yeah. So before we get into really that more in depth, let's just run through the time frame here. So we are in January and February of 93 when these issues are dated, and we get the Funeral for a Friend. We get a couple of issues, like there's one called Legacy of Superman, which shows people really, I'm just going to say it, forgotten superheroes like Gangbuster, who...
Yeah, he gets a whole story.
Yeah, he's got a whole story in all of this.
Yeah.
But you get to see these other, it's like 3 or 4 other street level almost superheroes, and
Right.
will they be the ones that are now going to be the protector of Metropolis? We get a Supergirl and Team Luthor issue of them stepping up and
being real creepy.
Yeah. But then it ultimately ends. These issues are in March of '93, and it ends with this special comic that got released that was made to look like a Newstime magazine. Which, for those of you who didn't know, around this time of the comics, Clark had actually at one point left the Daily Planet, and he worked for Newstime. And then, just to make a long story short, there's now a good relationship between the Daily Planet and Newstime. And it's in Funeral for a Friend that we get where Perry and Jimmy show the editor of Newstime, these are the pictures Jimmy has.
Yeah.
And the editor of Newstime actually lets Jimmy pick, which one do you want to be the cover, which then ends up being the cover of this comic. And the comic is just laid out like a magazine. There are articles from the editor. Yeah. There's these little blurbs from other people about, these fake celebrities and all, about the death of Superman. And this was kind of the way DC was telling the reader, all right, this is it.
Yeah.
This is your little tribute issue, and we're done. And they stopped, as you and I have talked about already, they stopped publication on all Superman comics.
Yep.
So I think it was February, even though these issues were in March, but they weren't the Superman titles. I think all the Superman titles that dealt with the Funeral for a Friend, I think they ended in February. So you got February of '93, all Superman publication released their quote-unquote last issue. Then you get the Legacy of Superman #1, which there was never a follow-up. You get Supergirl and Team Luthor #1, in which, again, there was never a follow-up. You get this Newstime issue, and then you get nothing until June.
Yeah.
And in June of 1993, Superman 500 is released. And this is the issue where Jonathan Kent enters the afterlife. He experiences some of his own personal afterlife, goes back to Nam, talks to his brother. But ultimately he ends up running into Clark, and he has to help convince Clark that he needs to fight to go back.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you said, it is such a great issue, because even when you go to the movies, well, not the movies, the TV show, I will say Smallville did this really well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really showing the impact that Jonathan Kent has on Clark. Smallville had, John Schneider play Jonathan Kent for several seasons. Then they decided to do the heart attack storyline. But then they kept John Schneider coming back in little scenes till ultimately in the final episode of Smallville, he's the one that hands Clark the suit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this issue is one of those moments that just shows, again, like you keep talking about, how important the Kents, both Jonathan and Martha, but how important the Kents are to Clark, Kal-El, Superman, whatever name you want to say, and how much of an influence they are for him. And the fact that, I might get emotional talking about this, but the love this father has for his quote unquote son, that essentially he's pulling him from the afterlife. So and then that's the start of
it becomes the
Reign.
Lever that leads into the rest of them. And I had honestly forgotten about this, especially with Man of Steel. I had forgotten, the whole even John Henry Irons has to kind of wonder about it a little bit, because this old it's like a voodoo priestess or something. She, gives a prophecy that he has a spirit
like,
attached to him, kind of thing.
I don't know if she's a voodoo priestess. It's just like some sort of like hippie lady that lives in the apartments.
Yeah.
but yeah, so, she does the tarot cards and.
But yeah, so that part of it I had completely forgotten about. I of course remembered, Jonathan Kent talking to Clark in the afterlife and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't remember it being the impetus that launched into the rest of it, because it then becomes, was that the reason that Superboy clone breaks out of the test tube and flies off, and did he return to his body as the last Kryptonian, and all that stuff. So it brilliantly launched into that series, and I do like the fake out with the last Kryptonian or Eradicator, whichever one you want to call him. The spirit rebirth that he gets, like the writers clearly wanted you to think that he was the Superman returned. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which they do very well, because it's the Fortress of Solitude. He's coming out of the Matrix chamber.
Yeah.
All of the Superman robots are acknowledging him as the master.
Yeah. But he's just this like energy being at first.
Yeah, so the Eradicator first was introduced in the comics back in 89.
Mm-hmm.
And he is literally just a machine.
Right.
At that moment. I think he's like a sphere.
Right.
And he's just a thing of, he just contains all this energy and all this knowledge about Krypton. But he is essentially a villain. I mean, the reason he's called the Eradicator is because he sees Kryptonian life and civilization as perfect.
Right.
And that anything that doesn't match Kryptonian life needs to be eradicated and destroyed. And so, that's where we get all that. That's where we get the Eradicator. And then Superman stops him, throws him into the sun, and that does away with the Eradicator, at least to our knowledge. It of course returns. I think they imply that it, and this ties into the Hank Henshaw stuff. It returns because Superman also had to get rid of the Matrix chamber. I think that's what it was. He gets rid of it because there's too much information in it that the Eradicator was going to use against them. So he launches it out into space. But then it's when the Hank Henshaw storyline happens, which I'll get into in a minute, where Superman remembers, oh, this is out there. He goes out there. There's the moment with Hank Henshaw as now this new being. And Superman brings the ship back and puts it in the fortress. So there's your setup. And again, we're talking years before this would happen. I mean, we're probably talking about 91 when all this is happening, which I know they didn't.
Took a couple years to pay off, yeah.
Well, but and then you and I talked about this. They didn't have a plan for this back then. Their plan was to marry off Clark and Lois. So the fact that they went, hey, you remember these from these two things from a couple of years ago? We're going to bring those back and tie them into this reign of Superman. So you got the Eradicator, who's the last son of Krypton. He debuts in Action Comics 687, and essentially he is Superman, but without any humanity.
Right.
Because he is just taking all that Kryptonian part and making himself into Superman. He gets a little bit of Clark in him because there are moments in the run where he remembers slightly the name Clark, and he knows who Lois is and knows that Lois is somebody special to him, but doesn't exactly know what it is. And he's the one that steals Superman's body from the tomb, which he's all energy at the time he does it. He's just that Kryptonian energy. And I was about to say spoiler alert for this 30-year-old story. And then what you end up finding out is that he stole the body to place into the Matrix chamber. The
Matrix chamber, yep.
So that he could then feed off of that energy to become the last son of Krypton.
Yeah, isn't it that he himself can't absorb sunlight like Kal-El can? So but
in fact,
it's implied that he's the regenerated body. That he is using the body of Superman.
In fact, sunlight bothers him so much that's why he has the visor. Yeah. He doesn't like bright lights.
He has to wear HD vision glasses. So
the yellow visors. But then let's go ahead. We were already talking about. Let's get into Cyborg Superman, who debuts in Superman 78. Again, all 4 of these comics came out in June of 93. So Cyborg Superman 78. We don't find out until everything's revealed about him being the villain, that he is Hank Henshaw. And Hank Henshaw is a guy, again, you go all the way back to an earlier Superman comic, which I don't have here because it was in my notes from last week. I want to ask you, do you know the Hank Henshaw story?
No. Again, I'm not a big Superman fan, but...
So, it is only 2 issues.
Mm-hmm.
I think you could say 3 because they do talk about the Excalibur, I think, in the issue before, but there's no mention of Hank Henshaw and the crew. But you've got the Excalibur. It is hit by a solar flare, which I'll jump around in the story a little bit, which later Superman thinks he caused because it happens almost the same time he throws the Eradicator into the sun.
Yeah.
And so he thinks he's caused the sun flare that then hit the Excalibur. The Excalibur was in space studying this cosmic radiation. And so it's 4 passengers. Stop me when you've heard this before. So it's 4 passengers. The scientist, Hank Henshaw, his wife, Terry, the pilot, I forgot his name. And then I think Steve is the name of the younger guy that's with them. They get hit by the solar flare. They crash back onto Earth. As they're crashing, they're even talking about how the radiation has been exposed and they're being eaten up by it. When they recover from the crash, Steve, the young guy, has now turned into just pure cosmic radiation. And he can fly, and he can shoot blasts out of his hand. The pilot...
Do they burn things when they...
Well, they do talk about how he... They do talk about how he is giving off high levels of radiation, and that it's almost dangerous to be around him. Yeah. And then the pilot, he ends up, his body melds with the earth and even some of the wreckage, and he becomes like this hulking thing, if you will. Yeah. Now, Hank and his wife Terry don't immediately have any side effects. Although Hank does say in a thought bubble that he does feel it inside of his body. Mm-hmm. What they then have is Terry ends up phasing out into another reality, another dimension is the way Hank puts it. So she essentially becomes kind of transparent because she's, yeah. Oh, because she's fading away. And then Hank's body is just deteriorating. That's all that they say. It's just deteriorating. You slowly see his skin starts to droop. His skin kind of becomes a little, I guess, stretchy. But his skin starts to droop until ultimately he is just nothing but a skeleton. And then, unfortunately, he died. No, well, let me go into all of this. So it starts off with the Human Torch. I mean, the cosmic radiation dude. He gets the radiation's kind of made him a little crazy. And he ends up realizing he feels the power coming from the sun and how he feels like he needs to be one with the sun. And so he flies himself into the sun, which ultimately destroys him. Then you've got a really tragic moment where the pilot, which for some reason the name Harrison's popping into my head, but I could be wrong. The pilot, every time he can't speak. He just kind of grunts. And every time they show his face, you can see tears in his eyes. And there's something, I think Superman even says it, where he must be in, just horrible pain. And you end up seeing a moment. This is after Hank has passed away. Superman is trying, he figures Hank has figured out a way to cure them. He's taking Terry there. The thing monster is following them. And then he stops at a door where inside of that room is an MRI machine. Or MRI type machine. Sure. I think it's like a tube. And pretty much he turns it on and it rips all of the metal out of him and he commits suicide, essentially is what he does.
Yeah.
Superman is able to save Terry with the help of what Hank had programmed. And that's the end of that story. It then comes back a couple of issues later, and you have Terry, who has kind of gone into this depression state because of what had happened. But you end up finding out that Hank, his, I guess you'd say, power manifested itself as he was dying, and he was able to enter his consciousness into the computer.
Mm-hmm.
And he can now control anything technological.
Right.
And he creates himself as a robot. He confronts Terry, which just freaks Terry out. Long story short, he ends up realizing that he's causing more harm than good. He's never a villain or depicted as a villain.
Right.
He realizes he's causing more harm than good. He knows the only way to truly fix things is to leave Earth. And you end up finding out that he senses that Matrix chamber floating up in space.
Mm-hmm.
He uses a NASA satellite to launch himself into that, and then he just takes a piece of it off and tells Superman, I've got to go figure out what life is like for me now.
Mm-hmm.
And he flies away. He even blasts Superman to keep Superman at bay, which Superman's shocked because he actually gets hurt by it. But then he realizes, it's Kryptonian technology, so it makes sense it could hurt him. Sadly, Terry becomes so distraught by all of this that she ends up committing suicide and jumps out of a window. And that's kind of where they end this story. And this is like I said, 91. They bring this cyborg Superman in, and then once they reveal that he is Hank Henshaw, they throw this elaborate thing together of him going, hey, I found out you threw the Eradicator into the sun. You caused the solar flare. That caused all of this horrific stuff to happen in my life. I blame you, and that's why I'm evil now.
Right, yeah, I remember that from, obviously, the end of
they briefly tell
Superman
it in
run.
But
going back to his introduction, to Man of Tomorrow's introduction, I should say.
Yes.
We don't know it's Hank yet, all that sort of stuff. That is one of the most clever issues, writing-wise, of all of this. Because there's nothing... They know that he's going to be the villain. Like, obviously, the writers already have laid out, what's going to happen, all that kind of stuff.
Because as we talked about, they plan things for a whole year.
Yeah. So you get this issue that you see... who is it? I can't even remember who it is that attacks the White House. The whole thing is very bizarre. That part, maybe not the best writing, but Man of Tomorrow, Cyborg Superman, whatever you want to call him, shows up, saves the day, meets Bill Clinton, gives him a cell phone. We discover that he can control all technology. The White House, in arguably the biggest faux pas of the Clinton presidency, gives all access to to the White House computers, to this Superman, all this kind of stuff,
and he gets the nod from the White House that they are claiming he is the true Superman.
But that entire issue, the whole story we just told, is through the eyes of a Daily Planet reporter who's trying to find like the ultimate story to impress Perry to get Clark Kent's job. Yeah. And so now, you don't get any
just to correct real quick, that's not the one he's introduced in. I think that's Superman 79, the next issue.
Yeah.
But the entire issue, there's no quote unquote dialogue in the entire issue.
And you get no thoughts from Man of Tomorrow. So you don't get any of his real motivations to do all of these things because he's evil. And so he's, it was just super clever writing. I really liked how they did that. And it still kind of tied you back in the sense that they're still telling you that something's not right with any of these Supermen in the sense that Clark Kent is still out there. Like there's something else happening.
They even have with each of these characters, and Steel ends up being the last one, which I'll talk about in just a second. But you have in these issues where Lois has to speak to each of them because she and you get what Lois is thinking. You know, it's like, that's not Clark. Like there's something doesn't, or she goes, it looked like Clark. It felt like Clark, but there was still something off.
Right.
And again, the Eradicator with his humanity, Cyborg Superman, there was just something very cold about him.
Well, but and you do have that cool moment though in the conversation you're talking about where he's, you do kind of want to believe that it might be Superman, and it's tragic. The whole, there's so much taken from me. I can't remember those things.
Yeah, the Cyborg talks about how there's stuff he can't remember.
Yeah, but
which again, he's just playing this game that we don't realize he's playing.
But then the guy who's not playing a game, Man of Steel, that one arguably is my favorite. I like the writing for Cyborg Superman. I thought that was super clever. But giving him a whole backstory, even though his alias is tragically not that great, just take your first and middle name and kind of flip-flop them a little bit, and people will be fooled by this, especially considering you apparently worked for the CIA. That's really going to throw them off of your trail,
Yeah.
But anyways, so I do remember, and maybe this is why he's my favorite of the four. I remember the episode that he's introduced in because of the violence. The kid who is gunned down. With whatever that bizarre tool that they just introduced
I forgot the name.
Couple of issues before.
That gun.
Yeah. It just burns people to a crisp, leaving nothing but a charred skeleton.
Toastmaster. That's the name of the gun. It just popped into my head.
Yeah, which hit kind of on the nose there. But one of the kids that he's like coaching in basketball or something gets gunned down, and like gang violence outside of the, let's be honest, the Harlem equivalent in Metropolis. And so it just starts so vividly, and then you find out that John Henry Irons is actually tied to that gun, and that he built it. Yeah, he was the inventor of all these things for the not CIA, I guess. I don't know, what the agency was called or whatever, but he's on the run from them, trying to atone for his sins, kind of stuff. And it's just a compelling story. I just really like that whole genre or whatever you want to call it of this branch. The kind of the guy who is very intelligent and very capable and didn't always make great choices, but Superman, and we talked about this before, that Superman had saved John Henry Irons' life and that he actually remembers him, but then when
feels that they had a connection.
But then when Superman dies, that John Henry Irons feels this need to kind of make up the difference. And so he decides to turn his talents to something useful, and he creates the Man of Steel costume. And that was my favorite run. I don't know, why specifically, but I just really like that whole story.
Well, and like you said, I think of all four, he's the only one of the four that really had his own story.
Yeah,
because he had all of that he was dealing with his former partner, the White Rabbit, who was using all these guns and selling them, and so not only is he dealing with the intertwining story with the other three Supermen, because they have where he deals with Superboy and all, but he's got this own storyline, which of course spawned the Shaquille O'Neal movie Steel. Was really just that storyline. But yeah, so now when he's first introduced, the name John Henry Irons doesn't come till later, because when he's first he's Henry Johnson. Yeah. And you end up finding out that that's the name he's using too, as you said, to hide from the government.
Right.
But yeah, because he was a weapons manufacturer, engineer for a weapons manufacturer or something like that. And I also like that he doesn't, because when Lois finally confronts him and she was like, I bet you say you're the real Superman and all. He's like, no, not at all. He was like, I've never claimed to be Superman. Yeah. He just says that he feels that he and Superman had a connection, and that he believes in, what is it? It's kind of like soulmates, but he a shared spirit with Superman. Yeah. And so that's why he decides to step up. And we didn't talk about Superboy.
Well, let's hang on before you move on to Superboy. So you already mentioned one stolen Marvel property. So a weapons designer that has an accident and decides to use his intelligence for good and builds a giant steel suit to I mean anyways,
but he's not a rich guy, so completely different. Completely different. But yeah, so we also get Superboy.
Oh boy, do we?
Yeah, which of course he doesn't ever want to be called Superboy. He's Superman. So he debuts in Adventure Superman 501. They do immediately, though. I mean, he even admits that he's a clone.
Yeah, almost immediately when he's talking to Lois.
But he still claims he's the real Superman, because he is just Superman brought back in his mind. So I will admit he's probably the weakest of the four in terms of character.
I'm gonna go a little further. I feel like I'm the one that gets brought on to like pick on some stuff, and buddy, this is not the strongest written comic book story I've ever seen at all. For one, I don't know. It's just kind of silly, the kind of antics that he's in the first place. He's just a little bit of a spaz. You get like weird panels where he's having anime type
there's a lot of anime,
like, where his head is like clearly shaking from side to side very fast with
he's got the moment
wide
where
mouth, nose, just weird stuff like that. And
he's in just a weird pose in the background.
And he's also a pervert. Like he's
some of the lines of dialogue
is not great.
Especially when he runs into Supergirl.
Yeah, but before that, he like sexually assaults a lady, kisses her without her consent. He kidnaps a reporter, and then she doesn't miss a beat and just decides to use his attraction to her to get a deal, and has him on TV because he's also young and impetuous and wants the spotlight, and doesn't like that he's the only one of these new Supermen who hasn't gotten any TV time yet. Just all of these things. But then, the whole thing with Supergirl and Lex Luthor throwing Supergirl, who he has a relationship with,
but using her
Superboy,
as a little bit of
it gets
bait.
super creepy. And then there's the like network executive or whatever,
the
who
agent.
Also throws his daughter at Superboy to seduce him and use him for his own
sign
gain.
The contract,
bro. It is rough. Like
it is.
That dude does not come out looking good. But
no.
Like,
I think he redeemed himself after this story kind of wraps up, but no, through the Reign of Superman storyline, Superboy, who would later take the name Con-El, which would play off of the Connor Kent that we would also get. But yeah, no, he's not good. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. That's why I've kind of held off on talking about Superboy.
It's not just the weakest written leg of this, quadrupod, whatever you want to call it. It's rough. It's not great. I don't think that those comics would be written today. I don't think you could get away with a lot of what he did.
No. I mean, there's even the drawing, because like I was about to say, when he meets Supergirl, there is a panel that is literally just of her chest,
and
while
his
he is
face
staring
right there,
staring
oogling.
right at her chest.
It's not good.
It's not good. It is definitely not good, and does not play out well. But the other thing is this character, which again they later, when they shuffled up the DC universes again, they kind of did away with this version of Superboy, brought in the Connor Kent, black shirt, red S version of Superboy. This Superboy was also just so of his time. Like, this was a 90s teenager. Yeah.
The only left ear pierced, the
haircut,
the leather jacket, the biker jacket, the 2 belts.
Yeah.
It was, whoo.
Yeah, he was very much a 90s. And then the S on the back of the jacket looking like a stitched patch. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, it's even the first issue, the cover they introduce him to, he's leaning up against a brick wall, and there's like the graffiti, the Superman graffiti on the wall.
Oh yeah, and it's also, they had put the name for every Superman in the just below the issue number and the DC logo in the top right hand. So for you get Man of Tomorrow, you get Last Son of Krypton, Man of Steel, and then you get Superboy, and boy is crossed out, and man is like, diagonally written in to fit in the bubble, like in graffiti. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, so we're not going to get into the return of Superman. We're going to save that one for a couple of issues, a couple of weeks from now. We'll talk about the return and then the legacy of this. So we're going to kind of wrap things up here. Like I said, next week, Nicholas Pepin's going to join me as we discuss the Reign of Superman movie, which of course does have the return, but Chad and I will save that conversation for the next one shot. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up. I mean, there was plenty to talk about here. Again, this is one of the greatest stories, and there's so much, like Chad and I have said throughout this episode, there's just so much that you can just walk through. I mean, you can pick one character.
Yeah. And
there is an entire story from, for almost a year for that character.
Yeah. Yep.
And it was great storytelling, great writing, again, with the exception of the Superboy stuff. But again, you can still say of its time, but it's the main part that doesn't hold up. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you again for this conversation, Chad, and we'll return in a couple of weeks to finish this out and finish out our Summer of Superman. And thanks everybody for listening. Rate and review the show. Let everybody know we've got this great run right here in the summer, right here where we're talking about the Summer of Superman and all of the death of Superman storyline all the way back to his return. And so tell people about it. This is fascinating stuff. I mean, 30 years ago, it got a lot of people into comics. Maybe this will reignite some people who maybe drifted away from comics. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up today. Thanks everybody for listening. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and listen to an 80s Flick Flashback podcast once in a while, you could miss it. Do you love movies of a certain age? Do Do you miss the days of VHS tapes, VCRs, and the video rental stores? Does the thought of another 80s movie being remade seem inconceivable? My name is Tim Williams. I'm the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. On each episode, I'm joined by guest co-hosts to discuss one of the many movies released in the 1980s. We share our first-time watch memories, our favorite scenes, and even learn some behind-the-scenes stories about the cast and crew along the way. New episodes are released every other Friday on your favorite podcasting platform. So make like a tree, get out of here, and go listen to an excellent episode of the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast. The ad is over. Go home. Go.
What seems to be the problem, pal?
There's just so much pain in the world, so many issues. I don't think I can bear it.
Well, friendo, it sounds like you could use a dose of pop culture roulette.
Pop culture roulette? What's that? Some sort of pop culture themed podcast or something?
That's right, sonny boy. When hope seems far, dive into some PCR.
But I already get my entertainment news from Variety.
Huh, that's pretty good. If you're a chucklehead, PCR gives you news you need, condensed, unfiltered, and raw, from three nerds who know a little something about something.
Wow, okay, sign me up.
That's the spirit. Pop Culture Roulette. New episodes every Monday, available on all major podcast directories.